Okay, for today's video, we are going to go through a bunch of the settings on the Mofi router. The particular router that we're using today is the 5500 series, in particular the 7690 version, which is not a 5G router. The next step up from that is a 5G, exactly the same. Settings look all identical. Everything's the same except one is with 5G and one is without. There is a third version that has dual modules so that you can use two SIMs from presumably two different carriers at the same time. But today we're going to use this 7690, which is kind of the base model in our opinion, from Mofi. And here's what we're working with that's sitting here beside me. The very first thing we want to do, and this is the first time it's been turned on, nothing has been done to this, so we're going to go step by step through it and learn how to set it up for the first time, or you can reference this video to reset it up or upgrade or whatever else you may need to do. The very first thing we want to do is go to the support portal on the page, and we're going to see what the latest firmware is to get that upgraded. Now again, we are using the 5500 version, and all of the models for the 5500 series all use the same firmware, which makes it very easy. If you are using the previous 4500 series, do note which version you're using, 1, 2, or 3. If it's a version 2, it'll say V2. If it's version 3, it'll say V3. If it's a version 1, it will not have a version number. And you will find that on the bottom of the router on the sticker right at the end of the model number for your particular router. You do want to use the right one, otherwise you will have big problems. But again, today we're using the 5500, so that is what we are going to want. Here is their firmware page. We'll scroll down a little bit till we see today that we're making this video, by the way, is the 1st of May 2022. You can see that a brand new firmware edition 4.0.1 was released just a few days ago. And if you wish, you can look at the change log, what's been changed on it, etc., etc. We're going to skip that. You can do that if you wish. We're going to go ahead and download the firmware. Okay. We can close this window. We can go back to our primary window. Now we need to log on to the router itself. By default, if you have not changed it, the IP address is 192.168.10.1, which will bring you to the login page for the router. By default, the password is admin. We'll get logged in here. And you'll notice up here that being a brand new router, it's set on the shelf for a little bit, so it's an older version at 3.2.5. We absolutely do want to get that firmware upgraded to the latest version before we do anything else. So to do that, we will go to the system menu, and we're going to come down here to backup or flash the firmware. Scroll down to the bottom here. We're going to flash the new firmware image. That loaded. There it is. Okay, we are not going to want to keep the settings. We'll go into this just a little bit more in a moment, but leave that box uncheck marked. Here is the file in place. We're going to flash the image. The first thing it's going to do is upload that file to the router so it has it in place, and it's going to inspect it. Now, one thing I did not show you, but you probably do want to check. I know this is right, so we're going to skip over it. But on that download page where we got the firmware, it will give you these checksum numbers that you just look at the last few digits and make sure that it matches, and that just tells you that the file has not been corrupted. It's not a fake one. This is the real thing. Once that is done, we're going to go ahead and proceed with the upgrading or flashing of the firmware. Now, this is going to take 5 minutes, 6, 7 minutes, something like that. I'm going to go ahead and pause this while we're doing that, and we'll come back as soon as that upgrade is completed. Okay, the upgrade has completed, and we're back to the main login page. If it does not take you to the main login page, again, just type in the IP address to come back here. Again, default password, admin. And we can now see up here at the top that we are on the latest firmware at this time. The very next thing we're going to want to do is go back to the system menu and come down to the factory default. You don't necessarily have to do this if you don't wish to. However, based on the recommendations from the engineers at Mofi, it is absolutely best to do a full factory reset immediately after upgrading a firmware. This has to do with it erasing the old firmware and old settings and implementing in new features and settings. We just want to make sure everything has an absolutely clean start. Now, when resetting, if you are using the cloud link, you can, can go ahead and check mark to keep those settings. We are not using that in this video, so we're just going to go ahead and do a reset. Do you really want to do it? Yes, we sure do. You'll get this screen, and it takes a couple minutes to do that. So we, once again, will go ahead and pause and be back as soon as that is completed. Okay, the factory reset is complete, and we are once again back to the main login page, which you should be redirected to automatically. With one exception, if you are connected with Wi-Fi, the factory reset is going to reset your Wi-Fi names back to the factory default. I personally am connected to the router with a cable, which is absolutely the recommended way for doing upgrades or setups or resetups or whatever you might be doing. A cable is recommended. Okay, we're going to go ahead and log back in. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do at this point is set your Wi-Fi name and password. Again, by default, it resets that to the factory defaults, which also have no encryption or password. So we want to change that. Notice that the unit does have two different networks. There's a 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz network. We're going to rename those. This is what I use by default. The encryption, you have some options here. We recommend going to this middle one, WPA2, not the mixed one, because the old WPA, if you're using things like a MacBook or an iPhone or whatnot, it will give you messages all the time about your network not being secure. It does not like that older original WPA. So instead of mixing the networks, we like to go ahead and set it directly to WPA2. You can leave the default Mofi password if you want. We recommend changing that. We're just going to change it to anything for now. You can change it to whatever you want. And again, we want to do the same thing for the 5 gigahertz network. Now, obviously, we don't recommend using password for your password. Just set it to whatever you would like, or go back to what we send out to you by default. Once done with that, we're going to go ahead and save that. That, again, is going to turn off your Wi-Fi network and rename it. So you will lose the Wi-Fi if you're connected by Wi-Fi. Once again, another reason to be connected by a cord or cable, preferably. All right, now that we're done with that, let's start configuring the router itself. We're going to go to the internal modem number 1, which most everybody should have. If you have one of the dual module routers with 2 SIMs, obviously you're going to want to do the following steps for each module, modem 1 and modem 2. We're going to go to configuration. In our case here, particularly today, we are using a Verizon chip. Obviously, the steps will be slightly different for AT&T or T-Mobile, but you'll get those figured out very easily. It does detect most chips automatically. We like to go ahead and set that specifically because then it's not having to check the chip and check the signals, etc., etc. It knows exactly what it has, which makes booting and getting up and running a bit faster. Once you do that, you can see all the different companies and notice that some companies have multiple APNs. You'll need to know which one you want to use. Your provider, in this case probably us, will give you that information. We are using Verizon. There's only one Verizon, so that makes it very simple. We'll go down here and save those settings. Do keep in mind it takes a few seconds for settings to actually save. You can see in your window where it's running a circle and you've got an X where you can stop it. We don't want to do that. We just want to wait for it to go ahead and complete that setting. Here it goes. All right, once that is set, the next thing that we want to do is the selective band lock. Now, one important note to keep in mind here, we do set this and test it before we send these units out to our customers. However, you will need to do it, of course, if you do an upgrade like this or switch carriers or something like that. But in addition, the selective band lock we want to do because, again, we don't want it to have to search every band out there, and we're going to make it look at only the bands that Verizon uses, which, again, gets you up and running and booting is a little faster, etc. Now, you can skip this step if you are going to do the speed band lock, which is here. We will cover that right after this section, but if you plan to do that, you can skip what we're going to do right now. In the meantime, here is the selective band lock section. The first thing we want to do is come down here to WCDMA bands. We want to turn that to none. Those bands, generally speaking, are all of the 3G, 2G, EVO, all of the slower and in some cases unused bands. We just don't want it to look at those. We don't want them at all, so set it to none. For routers that have a 5G section below this, there would be 5G bands, in which case the setting you want is all. We always want it to check all 5G bands to see if they're available. Now here's your 4G and LTE bands. These are what we're going to be using the most and primarily. I will post a link with a chart that shows each carrier and their currently available bands. For now, again, we're using Verizon. We know that that is going to be, for Verizon, that is 2, 4, 5, 13, 46, 48, and 66. So now that we have those selected, when it boots up, it is only even going to check those bands, and it's going to ignore the others, which speeds things up. Again, we're going to go ahead and save that and let it be applied. Okay. Now what we can do at this point, this is not required, but you certainly can. If we go to the signal strength and status page, we can see how we're doing at the moment. Now do note that where I am making this video, there is very, very little Verizon signal. You can see that by the graphical representation. You can see I've got 2 out of 5 bars. That is actually very unhelpful. What we really want to look at is the signal strength down here, which is measured in a negative dB number. Currently we're sitting at 112. It kind of bounces between 112 and 115 here. The best signal you can get is a negative 50. Remember, because it's a negative number, the lower the number, the better the signal. So a negative 50 would be the best signal you can get. About negative 120 is pretty much an unusable signal. So you can see that I'm around 112 to 115. It's kind of moving around a little bit, which it is considering a poor signal. That is true. I do have a poor signal here, but it is still usable. If I was going to use this Verizon chip in this location, I would probably want to add one of the external antennas, either on the roof if you're in a house, or in an RV out on the ladder or something like that, to get a better signal from outdoors. Okay, after we've looked at this, you can see that it is using the correct Verizon APN. It is registered on the network. It currently chose to use band 66, and at the moment, carrier aggregation is inactive. Carrier aggregation is this. All carriers and all towers broadcast in multiple bands, which is short for frequency bands, but we just call them bands. Most routers, they can use any of those bands, but they can only use one at a time. We like the Mofi units because they can aggregate or combine up to 5 different bands together. Now, as a band is similar to a highway, switching bands is kind of like changing lanes. It's, in this case, for this analogy, it's better to have a five-lane highway than a one-lane road. If somebody's out there jamming up the traffic in one lane, it can switch over to another lane. So that's what's going on there. In order to get the best results possible, what we're going to want to do is the speed band lock. This is the screen you will see. There are a couple of questions we have to answer here. The first one is, who is the carrier that you're using? In your case, it could be AT&T, T-Mobile, whatever. Today, we are using Verizon, so we're going to select that. Then it's saying, okay, which module is that chip in? Well, again, in the router we're using, it only has one module for one chip. So if you selected module number 2 in this one, it would do nothing because that doesn't exist. So we're going to leave on module 1. The note there is, if you have a dual SIM or dual module router, you're going to want to do this for each module so that it gets the best results. Next is, how many tests do we want to do? I personally generally just choose 1. As you can see, the default is 2, and you can do more. A 1 pass of test, the process will take about 10 to 15 minutes. Every additional test you add adds about 5 minutes to that time. So you certainly can do that. And of course, the more tests you do, the more accurate the results are going to be. For this case, we're just going to do 1. Even though this is not a 5G router, it still has the 5G lock here. Always just leave it on yes. Obviously, that part is not going to do anything on this one. But if you have a 5G router, you definitely want it to test those bands as well. The last option we have here is, what do we want it to do when it finishes? Well, this one's a no-brainer. We want it to take the 3 fastest bands out there, lock to those, and combine them together. So this is what your screen should look like before you start the scan, with the exception of course, if you're not on Verizon, then choose the carrier that you are on. Okay, I'll go ahead and start the scan here. And you can see it's going to start running here. Again, this is going to take about 10 to 15 minutes. So once we see that this actually does start, we will go ahead, and there it goes. You can see here's the bands it's going to test. It's going to start. It started. So we'll pause here and come back in a moment and look at those results so you can see what they mean and see what we get out of it. Okay, so the procedure for the speed band lock has completed now. While it's going, you will see all of this information pop up piece by piece as it's going. So you can kind of see that it's working on things. What we really care about here is the summary down below here. Okay, so in my case, you can see most of the signals around here are not so great for me. Band 2, there was a timeout, so that wasn't a Verizon band. Probably in this area, it was being used by somebody else like AT&T. Then it tried band 4. It got a result. I actually clicked on it twice, so it was doing 2 tests. During one test, it got 44. The next one, it got 28. Then it went on and on, etc. We tried band 13. We were getting 12 on one test, 13 on another. We came down here to 66. We were getting a little under 30 there, etc., etc. When it was all done, it chose the best. In this case, it chose band 4, 66, and 14. This is kind of a bad example. This is what happens if you accidentally hit the start scan button twice, even though you told it to do 1 test. It's actually running it twice at the same time, so that was a little error. It should have picked 3 different bands. We could always do the test again, or we can manually edit that, which I will do on my own. It should have chosen, it looks like 66 was a good one, and 4 is a good one. 13 wasn't so great. Okay, so that's basically why it chose it. It kind of rejected 13 out of it. This particular router, as we stated, does not have 5G support, and it tells you that. Everything's done, and it brought it back up. Now, for our own curiosity, we can go back over to the signal strength. We know that we have a poor signal still. It chose 66 as the best, which is correct. Carrier aggregation is still currently inactive. That's just because we are not currently using it, and it doesn't need it. It will kick that in automatically as you start to use it. Now, one other setting we would want to look at, and this will only apply to those of you that have a dual module or dual SIM, dual carrier router. It does not apply to everybody else, but we'll just touch on it real quickly. We would want to go to Mofi Business and then come down to failover/load balancing. We would click on load balancing and we would check mark that on and save it. Again, this router doesn't have it, so we're going to leave that alone. But you would definitely want that on a dual carrier so that it evenly loads the balance to both carriers and you get yet even more speed. In the meantime, we're going to go back to the Mofi internal modem. You'll notice there are currently two different speed tests here. We like to use these in the Mofi because it is a built-in speed test. It's not going to rely on your computer or slow down because of anything you may have running like VPNs or antivirus softwares, etc. This is built into the router, so it's going to be your best results. We'll go through each of them real quick. I can tell you that this very same Verizon chip in a different router, one of the other ones I told you about that can only use one band, I ran the test here earlier on that and was only getting about 4 to 6 megabits per second speed. So now that we've went through all of this and optimized the speeds, optimized the bands, aggregated them together, etc., let's see what we look like. So we're going to run this regular test here. And hey, quite the improvement from 5 to 6. Looks like we're hovering currently between 20 and 25. Now, of course, this will change throughout different periods of the day as more or less people get on the tower and are using it. So I was seeing it bounce between 20 and 25, which is extremely usable. You can stream all the way up to 4K videos. You can do all your work. You're going to be fine. I know earlier in the day when I did this for another router for another customer, I was even getting up around 60 or 65. And again, that's in my area where I have a pretty terrible signal from Verizon here, so that's amazing. The second test here you can run if you wish. This particular one, as you can see, is a speed test directly from Netflix. So this is going right to their servers. And it looks like it's coming out about the same, which is good. Now, again, these are built-in tests. They're going to be, generally speaking, your most accurate results. If you'd like to do one more, I recommend doing that. We're going to go to a different website here, www.speedofme. And we'll start the test. We like this one because it does multiple rapid tests. You'll be able to see each one of these little dots as a test it's doing as it's running through. It also tells you there are two different numbers. This bigger one is the average speed that you're getting, and it'll settle down as it finishes the test. The bottom smaller number is the max speed that it got through all of the tests as it went along. So you can see that's climbing a little bit as we're using it. It realizes we need more data. Upload test. Upload is almost always, with very few exceptions, going to be lower and usually significantly lower than your download speed. That's normal for all carriers, even if you're on a cable modem. You might get a 300 down and a 30 up or something. So that's normal for every internet. And there it is. We hovered around almost 26 with a highest of 28, and that's at this particular time of the day. If I tried that again in a few hours, it would change once again. Okay, I hope this video was informative and helpful for you. If you did like it, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel so you get notified of future instructional videos that we're going to be putting out. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.